The first thing I'd like to say is thank you so much, Dell, for putting this on and allowing me to do this. And folks from the IT community, appreciate you taking 50 minutes of your time to be able to do this. I'm sure we'll have a good time. So I'd like to start off around here. We start off simple here, folks. So Dell gave us some great definitions and explanations of big data. What I'd like to do is understand from your specific enterprise point of view, how do you view big data? So we have people from financial community, healthcare, consumer electronics companies here. How do you view big data? And Kirsi, maybe we start with you.
Well, thank you. See, what we are looking at as a stock exchange, like where we do in a sort of an 80 million transactions in a day. That's the kind of explosion which we have gone through. Like earlier we were doing 20, 30 million, and suddenly over the last 1 or 2 years, we have grown to that level. And it's not, so like Parag already had said earlier, what we are looking at as a big data is something where you need to go through this data in real time and do some analysis. It's not storing or how much of data did you store in your storage. We don't classify that as a big data. In real terms is how much data you have to go through to give you some analysis or some result in split seconds. That's where the definition of a big data lies in our kind of environment.
Excellent. Parag, how about you? What is big data to you?
Yeah, basically this, the Immersion Design Engineering Center, which is in Pune, it's a part of the design center globally. And there's a lot of data which gets generated through CAD and CAM kind of a designs, as well as there is a lot of data which generated from ANSYS kind of softwares for stress test and fluid test kind of a thing, which needs a lot of space for a temporary space, as well as sometimes it's a till the end of life product, we have to carry those design with the changes and upgrades. So that is the other challenge, that some data you have to carry for a longer period and some data space you require for a very minute, like sometimes for a week I need a 10 TB or sometimes for a month I need 20 TB kind of a thing. So those are the challenges which we face on a day-to-day basis.
Excellent, excellent. So on the funds management side, Subhajit, is it the same for you?
Yeah. So as far as big data is concerned, from my perspective as well as for my company's SBI Funds Management, I feel the challenges, or what I feel as a definition, is obviously one of the part is data, volume of data, as the data management perspective, volume of data perspective. But that is, I think, maybe more of a primary definition of big data. So I feel from our company's perspective that value of big data, what is the value, how it delivers value. So where it is more important, analytics is becoming more important in that space. So how do you really derive values out of your data? So if we can talk about customer, in our case, customer is a key component of our community. So how do you really analyze the data, a huge database of customer? So when you talk about customer database, so obviously there's a traditional technologies of BI, data warehouse, all these things are there for quite years, but it should go further up. So it's more of a focus on the analytics of the customer data. Then if you talk about internal side, we have a huge challenge in a financial sector like Bombay Stock Exchange, banks, the question of anti-money laundering, which have become very stringent in India, especially in the last few years, which were not of a serious concern maybe a few years back. So how do you really get the data and go through the business rule of those to identify who are your suspicious transactions customers? So that's the analysis and the value out of analysis. How do you really derive from the customer perspective, from your company's perspective? So for me, these two are the key factors.
Okay. How much of your big data is coming from new government regulations?
Government regulation, as I told you, anti-money laundering, which is, again, we have a regulator, SEBI, so which is regulator for the capital market. So a lot of factors are coming from there also. But obviously there are some internal compulsions as for the customer analytics and other. How do you build a new business model? How you make your operating costs lesser by analyzing the big data, targeting the right size customer, launching right products for the customers. So those are non-regulatory, but they are key for your decision-making processes.
Excellent. So let's turn to healthcare. We had talked earlier before about the ability to save money and actually classify different customers in your hospital.
I would rather put patient at the center of all activities, Patrick. And I think patient governs our entire healthcare ecosystem. What does the patient want? Patient wants his reports timely and whenever he demands. At the same time, the doctors, the paramedical staff, the financial persons, they want the data to treat the patient better, to have a patient safety measurement system in place and stuff like that. So I think it is very, very important for us to have that kind of a data, but it is difficult to capture unstructured data, which is very, very, a part of the medical system. So that's the challenges we face in our industry.
Excellent, excellent. And Gaurav, I'm sure you, in your global role, talked to a lot of different end customers and the way that they view big data, and I'm sure that reflects in Dell's definition. Are things you've picked up from talking to the folks here today that may change or give insights on your definition of big data?
I mean, in all honesty, I feel, one aspect which is interesting, the more customers I talk to, is how the definition of big data is evolving. Talking to customers for the last 2-3 years, I think the initial conception of big data was all about the warehouse, right? And the warehouse, which is a repository. And it's now, beyond the warehouse and the query and the analytics that's behind, the whole notion. And that's a change you're seeing a lot more now, where people are grabbing their arms around the real value of how, big data even came about as a concept.
Excellent. And Arjit, you're the absolute storage god in this room, and I'm sure you've been listening to all of your customers here in the audience and their big data requirements. What have you picked up from talking to these folks?
Okay, so I think we heard from 4 of our customers, and then we keep on hearing on our day-to-day interaction. I think the point of big data is it is like another management challenge that we have as part of managing this entire growth of or this explosion of data. And the honest answer is that there is no ready-made solution as such for that, right? I think especially for different verticals and all, the solutions are not even standardized even in that way. So it is to start with, let's say, I have a huge amount of data. So earlier it was like small amount of data. It was easier to manage, easier to search, easier to retrieve, and then easier to do maybe some amount of analysis as part of it. But today the huge amount of data has been there, and then again different type of heterogeneous platform, applications, different type of needs, and SLAs that you have to meet. As part of that, how can we manage that data? How can we research that data? How can we retrieve it? How can we make it always available? I think this entire component should be looked after this concept of big data. So I would say this is more of like a business challenge in terms of managing the entire information, the digital information, which is the storage subsystem, and the data being stored as part of that.
Excellent. So big data, we're making up here about how big data. Is it this big? Is it this big? And I'm guessing on the financial side, it's really big. I mean, how much is your data growing on the financial side? And we'll start with you, Sujit.
If you talk about any asset management company, so obviously data size is growing, but I don't think they are growing exponentially. When you talk about data size, generally we talk about the transactional data size, which is a traditional data size. So those are growing in the normal speed of 15 to 20% year to year. But if you look at really, when you talk about big data, we have to look at basically what you call unstructured data or various layers of structured data. So those are growing rapidly in our organization, but many times we are not aware of those growth, or we are not able to capture those data because we don't know what we are going to do with the data, how much time we retain those data, because there are some regulations. For us, is 8 years is the minimum time period we, as a regulatory mandate, you have to keep the data. So there's a lot of growth happening on the unstructured data or various other layers of data, which is more of a today for the social marketing perspective and emailing perspective. So there's a huge growth there, and there's obviously in the future, I think next, based on a lot of research studies, including the McKinsey studies, you see there's a huge growth potential in those segments.
Okay, so 15-20% seems pretty stable.
Yeah.
Binod, how about on healthcare? I mean, healthcare is known for having an innumerable amount of sensors, whether they be electronic, even when a nurse might take a piece of data, it gets typed into a computer. It seems like in healthcare, you would have more data than you even would know what to do with or even be able to afford.
Absolutely, Patrick. Just to give an indication of the size and scale of our operations, we have close to 9,000 beds, and we touch about 20,000 patients a day. And that's pretty large. And the issue is, do we need to have the centralized data, or what level of decentralization we need to have? At the same time, within our company, we have said that these are the minimum data sets which needs to be captured across the entity. Otherwise, that can't get rolled up, and we can't have patients moving from one location to another. Because that's one big change, fundamental change. Because currently, 15 of our hospitals are all interconnected, and patients can move from one location to another. The second is, which is more of a medico-legal angle, how much data to store and how long shall we store. So we get into a little quagmire in that area. The third is finance keeps bugging us in terms of do we really need this data? And then they come back and ask what is the case mix, which case gives us the maximum contribution margin. So we get into that kind of activities, right? And lastly, patients, obviously every penny counts. Patient doesn't want to pay for the storages and IT system. They said, boss, give me good treatment. I want my discharge summaries in time. I want my lab reports in time and at an affordable cost.
Well, and I'm sure your boss just gives you an exponential increase in your budget, right?
That's a marginal increase in budget.
Okay.
In that way. And as far as data is concerned, I think we are growing about 30-40% per annum.
Excellent, excellent. So, Parag, let's shift to you on manufacturing, consumer electronics. How have you dealt with this explosion in data? How have you kind of met the challenge here?
No, actually, every time we do all this exercise, I'm sure the rest of the CIOs sitting here, they will also agree with this. We do a design, we do talk to vendor, we understand the new technology, we release the purchase order, we get the material, and when we do the sizing, let's say it's a 10 TB, when we get the delivery, its requirement goes up to 20 TB. So that itself is a big challenge till the time you really get into the designing part. And day by day, actually, if you look at a lot of storage technology is also changing. So getting into that and upcoming with the whatever the business requirements are there from the storage side, as well as completing the end user requirements is really going to be a tough.
Okay. Now, what, if you don't mind me asking, what specifically are you deploying? What kind of storage?
Today, I used a couple of years back NetApp, then we moved on to EMC, then we moved on to Compellent. Today, last 1 year we are using Compellent, and it's not my statement, my technical guy statement that they are much comfortable with Compellent compared to the EMC. So the growth which we saw in the data, which Compellent could handle it much better way compared to the EMC boxes. And the addition to the Compellent boxes in terms of the disk as well as the SAN versus NAS kind of a capacities, it was much easier to do what we were doing it with the EMC boxes.
Excellent, thanks. So, Kersey, how are you dealing? So, first of all, are you seeing this, a 15 to 20% increase in data a year, as we were discussing here, or a little bit more or a little bit less?
No, it's the same. It's around that much. But what we face is a different challenge. It's like the whole set of data gets duplicated. Right? In our case, like one system generates so many transactions, and it's passed on to the other systems. Right? Because traditionally, this stock exchange is a 137-year-old organization. Like our technologies were there more than 15 years ago. The systems have been developed. The processes have been set. So it's like so many years data which is there. So there is like a trading system and there is a surveillance system. Everything that happens into a trading also goes into the surveillance. Okay, so for us the dilemma is which data is more useful for analytics. Is the raw trading data more relevant, or the analyzed which has a surveillance value add is more relevant? Because if there's a regulatory requirement, I have to go back to the raw data and take out information and do for this. But if the surveillance wants to keep running any queries coming out from even the regulators, they say my data is much more valuable because I have done some value add and put it on those. Another challenge is these two guys, both the systems, because of its legacy, don't talk to each other very frequently. There's no synchronization. So as a thing, we can reduce our capacity to half, provided we start getting some value into this. Let's try to get some, maybe 5-10% more into the existing data, so at least I can reduce and use the same capacity. That's what the challenges which we are doing now, and we are on that journey. And it's not so easy because we have a legacy of so many years, 15 years data. Managing it's not so easy. So that's our journey. We are trying there, and hopefully by this year end, I should be able to save. Maybe if I'm not purchasing, at least I'll create capacity from my within the thing.
You brought up a really interesting point of having to make the decision between what data is relevant and what data is not relevant. And from a government regulation point of view, it's probably relatively easy to know what data you have to keep, right? Or does that even have gray area?
It's very, government, our government laws, I don't want to quote it if it's live, because it's very vague. Like for example, they say you have to keep 10 years data. Okay, fine, that's one cutoff. If there is any litigation in any one of the members, there's a case against a member in the 11th year, you have to keep that relevant data of that person, which is practically not possible for me to isolate one customer's data and keep that isolated. I don't know what is relevance to some other. If it say tomorrow, if he says it's related to Mr. A and B also, I don't know the relation now. So practically, if there's any litigation or somebody is there, I have to keep that year's data, full year's data for the entire thing. So though the regulations are there to cut off, because of this vagueness, it is still not, we have not been able to throw out or any data as of from our warehouse. We still have data from the day BSc started computerization. We have each and every trade data in our system, even as of now.
So the decision to keep data or get rid of data could potentially get the company or people into an issue if they've made the wrong decision.
Yeah, so that's why nobody wants to take a call. Right? Don't want to take a call. So when I ask my compliance, say, no, but what if something comes up? Who's responsible? My take is, yes, at least we take it out from the live data or live storage. We can always keep a cold backup of this somewhere. If somebody needs, maybe I'll take 2 days, 3 days to retrieve the data and give them information, whatever I want. Okay.
Excellent.
So currently I'm taking that hard state myself, from my organization point of view. I'm trying to put a 5-year limit. Let's cut off and keep everything else. Because it is like presuming, the probability of that happening is very remote.
Okay.
So you can't pay so much for a probability for not happening.
Excellent. So it sounds like a good storage customer down there. He just needs to keep buying more real-time data because it's so important to his enterprise. So, Arjit, you get a macro view of folks' storage requirements all over India. What are they telling you? And I know it's hard to boil it down into one thing. What is the number one challenge when you meet with your customers as it relates to big data right now?
So the honest answer is, I think, the cost. I think as and when the size of data is really growing, and and you are, each one of us are looking for a huge amount of space to store that data. I think what we have to look for, rather than every one of us are looking towards, is that how the cost of managing the entire thing really comes down. Right? That is the first answer. Now, then we need to start looking at that. What all are the components which is basically making that cost to go high? So let's say, if the cost of storing per terabyte of data, say in 3 years back, what was that, and vis-a-vis what is that today? And I think that is where I think from people like us, from a vendor perspective, as a technology evangelist perspective, we have to see that how that cost is being perceived. We need to look at the kind of data, the type of data, the priority of that data, the kind of availability that you want to make for the data. Like, as you are explaining, like, not every data needs to be as part of your primary storage, and you don't really require a search or a query for the data always, right? So I'm like, so today we go to a bank and then we want to get our bank statement, which is 3 years old, and I don't get it in online. But that doesn't mean that, okay, I'm cursing that bank. So what the bank has got a procedure is that, yes, they have an SLA. They will say, well, I'll take your request. I will come back to you in 3 days' time, and maybe I will charge you some amount of nominal amount. So which means they are not storing. That data is still important to them as well as to me. It's secret for both of us. But, we have been agreed to an agreement that, okay, the data which is not, needs to be always available as part of the primary storage could be stored in a different place. So that is where different tier of storage comes into the picture, and then the cost really makes much more sense. So as a vendor, maybe Gaurav, you can add a little bit more, and, as a technology vendor, what we are trying to do constantly, how do you drive innovation to make sure that the right priority of data is being understood and being used, and accordingly the cost is being implemented on that.
That's good. And Gaurav, you have undoubtedly been in some of the largest data centers on the planet. I mean, you have a global basis, and I'm sure you meet with folks who, might run big search engines, unnamed social media sites, absolutely the largest factory-level football field-sized data centers that are out there. What are some of those unique challenges for the mega data centers out there that you've seen that are, let's say, unique to them versus others?
And you're talking in relation to big data?
Exactly, big data.
In all honesty, I mean, they all face exactly the same challenges. It's not unique. Look, at some point in time, critical mass does make a difference, right? The amount of data that I have, if it's in gigabytes versus terabytes versus petabytes, absolutely makes a difference. Why does it make a difference? Because of things like fabric and compute, right? When you start moving, like let's take the hospital example, when you start moving a file that is a terabyte in size, it puts a heck of a lot more pressure on your network compared to something that's much smaller. But the essence of the problem, right, is still the same, which is trying to figure out what data is pertinent, what data do I need to query off of, and what can I do to ignore the rest of the information, which is not going to result in, in me making a bad decision or me making a no decision. It's back to the age-old question of what do you govern and what do you retain? It's the same thing with big data. What do you mine to drive the right decisions? And that's a struggle. I mean, I talk to customers with an IT shop of 5 folks and 5 servers who have exactly that problem compared to somebody like Facebook, who's got, petabytes of information, and doing something very similar. The challenge remains the same. The challenge does get different and puts a lot more pressure on fabric and compute once, you start getting larger in size based on the customer.
That's good insight, and it's interesting that regardless of the size of the enterprise, it's a pretty consistent challenge. And that's unlike other parts of the data center where in a lot of these mega data centers, if you peel back the roof, you have very, very different kinds of servers that are related to specific workloads. And with storage being consistent, that's a pretty interesting point. Dell talked about a hierarchy of big data. They talked about, it's kind of at ground level, you have casual data analysis. Moving up a notch, you have information consolidation, followed by proactive reporting, predictive analysis, and ultimately at the pinnacle, which was in big red at the peak, big data. And I would just wanted to get a sense of in real life, where are your enterprises right now on that? And maybe, Kersey, we could start with you.
See, like I said earlier, it's earlier the concept was try and store everything online and try to keep doing this. You started this journey of classifying the data, which is the biggest pain in this entire stuff, in this entire journey, because from a day-to-day business, it's not impacting anybody except the IT, because it is ultimately going to cost us the IT budgets to manage it. So the biggest pain is consolidation and trying to figure out what is relevant need, which we have started that journey. It started with also consolidation of data and consolidation of systems. Like from the disparate systems, we are trying to whatever the data is common, trying to bring those things into a common fold. And we are basically creating a parallel, I mean, for a certain time, it's going to be an overlap for a certain period of time, we understand. But once I do that activity, going further, like, it's going to be much, much easier because we have to see, the problem was we tried to keep a lot of data we are keeping data, not information. So the way we are trying to do is we are trying to keep relevant information, so information is still more concise and still give you the same value. So that's the activity we have started doing it. So we are trying to completely rethink the way we are trying to store data in a completely different way, like what is relevant in our industry, what is the queries being generally asked by the regulators, what kind of information that we need. Because for the raw data, I still have tapes of my transaction which is stored in a cold storage. I mean,
Okay.
it's always there. If somebody wants it, I can re-bring it out and give some output, that's okay. But to do a big data, big analytics, why do I need to have so much of granular data, which we're never going to use it? So it's a completely different thought process which we are trying to go through it, and which I say it's a journey which we have just begun. Okay, so and that's the way we are trying to go over there.
So it sounds like you're well on your way to what Dell referred to as proactive reporting, right?
Yeah, sort of like we have already thought through because earlier I used to, when I took over this challenge, like I thought that we are working for the regulators and not for ourselves. Because the bigger the, why we are asking complex, the regulator is asking more and more complex queries, which they are in the right to ask us. But it does not mean that I have to answer to the regulator in 2 minutes. Because we can always take a time from the regulator since the queries will run through this and give you out in a certain predefined SLA. It only needed somebody to go and consult the regulators. Can I give it in 5 days? If they said, okay, we are perfectly okay. But nobody had gone and said, because the fear of the regulator sometimes is overwhelming unnecessarily, profound, because if the regulator always send out a please give it to us urgently. But if you go and speak to the regulators, and which we have found they are very receptive because they themselves are fighting the same battle. The fact that they are asking us, though they collect all that information, they are not able to generate it themselves in spite of having all the data with them too. So it's the same challenge with them also. So it's a question of give and take. You go and regulate, talk to them, and things will definitely smoothen out.
Excellent. Parag, in your environment, where do you feel like you're in the hierarchy of big data?
Yep. As Kersey said, that we are actually now getting into the level of a data classification that we can do and use storage tiering in the sense of whatever is very important, very accessed very frequently. That should be like intellectual property data which we generate. That will be on a very important kind of or a very reliable kind of a storage. The data which like temporary gets generated, that should get moved on some temporary storage kind of or lower end kind of a hard disk kind of a thing. So there we are trying to balance between the cost as well as with the performance, and same time the same thing which we want to replicate, because when it comes to the disaster recovery part of the storage, I know for the applications there are a lot of disaster recovery things are there, but in our case it's our data is the disaster recovery. So taking a 10 TB, 20 TB into the DR, that itself is a big challenge. So we are still working on that, and first level of data classification we have completed, but data DR, which still we are struggling on it.
Okay, so per the Dell terminology, it sounds like you're in the middle of information consolidation in addition to the classification.
Yeah. So that's a thought again, because the way everybody has done a server consolidation or a server virtualization part, but till today those has a lot of branch offices or branch regional offices kind of a thing. They have a storage in the region or in the branch as well as in their main data centers. So can it be possible to do that a storage consolidation at one place? Well, I know there are a lot of limitations in the protocols as well as the WAN acceleration kind of devices also gives up to certain extent, but they don't give a performance like the way we use it over the LAN. So I think there is some technology improvements are required on those part also, where then all this storage can also get consolidated.
Okay. Subhajit, you had talked about fraud detection in your enterprise, are you to the point where you can actually predict the fraud before it happens based upon somebody entering your system for a trade?
No, I don't think. At present, we are not capable of that kind of situation. So obviously going forward, it may be, but at this kind of technology solutions or kind of organization structure we have, I don't think none of us are capable on that. So another thing I just want to touch upon on this, maybe not specific to your question, maybe in general. So that definition of big data and how it is going to really impact all of us, technology vendors as well as user community. There are a lot of things to be done. There are a lot of gaps I feel, according to me, there. Since Dell is a premium technology vendor and a lot of us are there on the user community side, I think there are a lot of misconceptions of big data exist in the marketplace. A lot of misinformation exists, and also there are a lot of myths about big data. So when you talk about, you see across the panel, there are two segments we are talking about. One is the volume of data you are talking, and at the same time we are talking of the analytics of data. But always, as of now, in the current situation, in none of our existing user communities, we have that capability to integrate both, to deliver really a value of the big data. As I told you in the beginning, value of the big data, the volume is not a big challenge. The data, what is the big data value it will deliver, okay? And as you know, there are three, I think, V's of the big data, which are very pillars of big data. One is obviously volume. Second is velocity, that your rate of change of data, that is very important, and the variety of data. So we generally, this is a myth we call about unstructured data means big data. So that is not, according to me, is always the case. So there are a lot of layers of structured data. It's a combination of variety of data where the challenge comes. So these three V's of big data is very important. So a lot of us have not understood the definition of big data, and it's not possible to implement that. And on the technology vendor side also, I believe a lot of people are working on that, but still we are yet to reach that stage when the solution provider will come with a sort of holistic solution. We should talk about the data, challenge, retention, how much data you require. So it's not data, how the insights of data, information of data. So these are, I think, the very key factors should be well understood, and only we can move forward now.
And the separation between, we'll call it the storage and management and the big data, how do, the analytics of that data, how do those analytic projects come into your enterprise? Are they driven by the CEO, or are they driven by regulations? How do you even budget or plan for something like this?
Yeah, so this kind of project don't come from regulators generally in our environment. It mostly comes from business units, business heads, or CEO of the companies, based on their requirements. So it's driven by them, and obviously in many cases driven by IT heads, how good or how pragmatic the CIO of the company is there. So obviously most of the cases I think it will be relevant for business heads. So they perceive a lot of value in your data analytics. So most of the banking, financial sector, that data warehousing, BI is already in place. So those are driven by, you have a separate unit called business intelligence unit, who are not a IT unit. They are basically a business unit. So mostly they drive it, and obviously IT has to implement that.
Let's shift gears now to the vendor side. And we're going to pretend for a second that we're not at a Dell event here and speak generically. If I can put you on the spot, Binod, what is it that you really want to see from your vendors a little bit more, or maybe even a little bit less, as it relates to your big data needs?
Simple, vendors should give us at that price or cost which is affordable. I think that is primary, with obviously acceptable service levels. That's number two. And two, the vendors needs to understand very closely how a healthcare ecosystem works. I think that is one big area where, at a personal level, I have seen that they need to stay engaged into the hospitals, understand how the flow works, understand what touches the patient and their immediate family members, and that's the, very, very extremely sensitive area. The third is, I'd like to quote a couple of examples here. One is that we utilize this data what is within our system link up to the average length of stay with patients. If there's a particular clinical protocol which is defined, if we treat in a particular pathway, does the average length of stay for that particular surgery or a procedure come down? So that is beneficial. The second thing we also find for a lot of the preventive health checkups happening, the cardiac arrest, which was to 50 years plus, now it is 40 years plus. Okay, and similarly, more and more people are getting diabetic. So that's the disease trend. So data is available, but the issue is how much of it is structured, how much we can capture, and how much we can store. And the vendor needs to understand the sensitivities of data and work together with the hospital and its entities.
So would you feel more comfortable if one of these vendors actually had somebody who had worked in healthcare for a while, or just a really smart person who understands data and can empathize with the situation that you have?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. How about, Parag, how about on your side? What would you like to see a little bit more of, a little bit less of with your big data vendors?
See, basically, as the data every day it's growing, that's the truth. There's a lot of designs and other things which are happening. On the same line, we also have to, there are a lot of new projects also comes in, which also puts another load on our sizing of data or our understanding of the growth. And you do any analysis or any algorithm use, last 3 years so much increment, so next 3 years this will be increased by 3x or 4x, and suddenly it finishes in 1 year. And then again you do recalculation, and then you don't understand where you exactly are going wrong. So I think this is the journey which is going to do, which we have to travel as the business goes. And these are the challenges which are going to be there, and sometimes because of the business, sometimes because of the applications and the data sizes which are getting generated within the organization itself.
Yeah, so in other words, take accountability and know enough about storage in your enterprise so there aren't a lot of surprises. Is that right?
Yes.
Good. Kirsi, how about you? What gaps do you want to see your big data vendors fill?
One thing, I don't know whether Dell is doing it or not, but though we have seen that you have talked about open standards, talking across each system, but I have not yet seen whatever this data storage solutions, whether an EMC, whether you will be talking to the IBM data warehouse versus your data warehouse versus Oracle Hexalogic. Do you see these guys talking to each other on some protocol in future? The reason I'm asking very simple is, if today I have invested with vendor A, which I was there, I will try and build up on that guy because it's not having a compatibility with some other solution, because nobody will rip and replace. That's because it's a legacy data which is there. So is there any thought, because this is the biggest challenge in this industry I have seen, because nobody is still talking to each other. Because when we are doing evaluation, we had challenges. We said, no, we'll give you the whole solution, we'll give you discount, we'll buy back this, and all those things, but I know how difficult it is to implement that, and it's just not practical. But is there any thought within these big players to work on some common platform, so that at least you can, maybe the additional piece you take, you work with the legacy, and you at least get into it?
Well, Arijit, I'll put you on the spot. You heard the question. Do you have an answer?
So I think, like every vendor, our basic objective is that we want to lock our customer. I'm just joking. That is not the fact. So I think we are definitely thinking on that same line. And if you look at around 8 years back, when the storage means I need the highest performance, I need the most secluded array or my system, and I need to have a very highly paid guy to manage that because it is so much secured and so much of complex to manage. When this ice case is a protocol being evolved, I think we are one of the organizations where we thought that that should be another answer in against of the proprietary fiber channel technology that was already predominant in the market. Right now, having said that, I should also tell you that it is again the application requirement or the performance requirement of the application or the users who are using that application which should dictate the kind of pipe or protocol or path that you should have from your compute or application to the storage subsystem. We need to have a combination of both of them depending upon the kind of application that we'll have. Now, answering to your question, let's say whether Dell is going to work on a solution of storage which will tomorrow talk to maybe any other vendor storage. I think we are still in debating within ourselves as part of our innovation team that, okay, what is the best way to address that? Because, ask or requirement is something which is very valid, but it is also a question like, what is the, way we can really make it happen? So what we are trying to look at is that at least from the simplified perspective, let's say, you want to go ahead and deploy a SAN and storage area network, and then how fast that could be done, and then how easily that could be managed, and then how it can help you over a period of time to cut down your cost as and when your data becomes really big, is really we are working there. And that is why, like, being a number one player in the ISKC market is even proof of the pudding.
Do you see something Q1, Q2s of which year? Is there any roadmap? Because normally I get this, we are doing Q1 of this, Q2 of this. So is there any roadmap for that?
Well, actually, we just, we're running out of time. I'm just kidding.
Now, I mean, fundamentally, to get metadata to talk to each other is, I'll be honest, next to impossible.
Yes.
Right? To code so that metadata talks to each other built on a NetApp or an EMC or a Dell is really difficult. Now, what we are absolutely working towards is the systems management angle. Yeah. They don't directly talk, and you can't transport one data from one array to the other array, but you can absolutely manage it, in one single. And that we have a roadmap for. Honestly, it's not as quickly as Q1 or Q2, but it's definitely something planned out for next year and the years coming. And some of our acquisitions, RNA is one acquisition, right, that allows you to manage data irrespective of whether it is in production, Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, archive, backup, cloud, anything. Some of those technologies are enabling you to do that. But, I mean, in all honesty, the amount of code that has to be written for it to be able to sustain such a large environment is just complicated more than anything else, right?
Excellent. So, in the audience, I'm going to open it up for some questions. There are some microphones. Here's one on your left and one on your right. If I could ask you to step up to the microphone and let us know who you are and where you're from, if you have any questions.
Hello, hi. Godfrey, I'm from Pest Control of India. Hi. Go Bugs. So, a lot of us we're talking about big data and big systems and, on the scale of EMC, on the scale of having Ecologic, Compellent, etc. But a lot of us have desktops, which have unused storage lying on them. So going from the perspective of a statement that was made earlier in the forum, you're talking about using existing infrastructure to direct policy. So is it possible to actually utilize these distributed hard disks which are across laptops and desktops, unifying them under one distributed file system with low individual compute and network costs, but with a higher parity?
That's in an essence what client cloud computing is, right?
Sorry?
That's in an essence what client cloud computing is. If you virtualize, all of your clients so that you're utilizing more the back end as opposed to the physical laptop, dumb terminals, whatever you want to call it, thin clients and all, that's what that technology enables you to do, right? It abstracts what you have from a hard drive standpoint and more puts the data back into the data center. Now again, the question was asked, what's the difference between a large company and a small, repository? The difference is just size. If you've got 20,000 users that need, 300 gig, you need to make sure you have the network that can support, a technology like, we bought a company called Wise, and they do this client cloud computing. So it abstracts everything out of the physical device, allows you to keep everything in the data center. Things like patch management, virus softwares, all of that become a lot easier, but it puts a different burden. It puts a lot more burden on your fabric, and you have to make sure your fabric can handle, 20,000 users coming online at 9 a.m. on a Monday morning and things like that.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, microphones on the right and on the left. I think we have one right here, table 19.
I'm Anil Nadkarni from Thermax.
Can you get a little closer to the microphone,
All right,
please?
okay. Am I audible now? Fine. My name is Anil Nadkarni from Thermax. The question to the panel is, basically we're talking of dedupe in the backup and solution. Is there something, Dale or somebody can look at this technique by which you can do a dedupe while actually writing the data onto the...
We actually have technology that dedupes while writing. Ocarina is a company we bought 2 years ago, but I'm going to be very honest here. You have to be really careful about dedupe while writing to production. I'll take the healthcare example, right? One of the big challenges, and I love the technology. I'll give you an example. One of our first customers around dedupe was Facebook. They had a bunch of NetApp, and they were constantly having to buy new filers, literally every month, because Facebook was expanding so rapidly. They brought in Ocarina, and this is an absolute real case example. They cut down their storage requirement by 50% through pure compression, nothing else. But think about the legal and statutory requirement on a Facebook as opposed to deduping a cancer patient's X-ray or MRI, right? So when you dedupe at source, it is a phenomenal technology. Ocarina can do it. We're going to have it on our main platforms in the next year itself. Like Equalogic and Compellent will have dedupe at source, so at production. The only thing I'll honestly point out to you is look at your business use and be really careful before you jump into deduping at source, because it could, it's fine to say I can take a medical image and I can abstract all the colors that a human eye cannot see, and I can compress it that way, and I can reduce the size of that image by 40%. However, the moment I have a machine looking at that image and say a machine can actually see the colors that the human eye cannot, then I have a figure that's, might be, from a governance standpoint, not correct. So you've got to be careful. Again, it's very specific. I'm using a very specific healthcare example. A lot of you might not have the same regulatory conditions, but the bottom line is the technology absolutely exists. We bought it 2 years ago through a company called Ocarina. We're going to launch it on Equalogic and Compellent next year itself. All I'll say is look at your use case and be careful about implementing dedupe at source.
Thank you very much.
Okay, any more questions? Oh, we have one right here by table 10.
Hi, it's Lalit from Ernst & Young. I think in this panel discussion, we discussed more about storing the data and less about analyzing the data. I think for me, the importance of big data is how we can analyze it better. And, so we talk about the 3 V's of the big data. I think if we can analyze it, we can have 4th V also, which is victory over the 3 V's. So what are the tools available to analyze the big data right now? And if not available right now, a lot of us are storing our data in unstructured manner, like some of us are storing in Adobe Acrobat format, someone is storing in the drawing formats. How we can tag our data now in a manner which can be analyzed better in the future. Because drawing doesn't speak about itself, we need to tag it in some certain important parameters. So what we can do now to get ready for big data tomorrow?
I think so. Two questions. What can you do to get ready for big data tomorrow? Start off with classifying the data and make sure you're confident in your data management solution, right? Make sure you're confident in your foundation so that when you add an element of analytics to it, you have easy accessibility and you know what you want to query, right? That aspect is, I think absolutely paramount. With respect to the tools that are available, there's a ton of solutions available today, honestly. The tricky part is what is the right solution for you, right? SQL has quick start, fast track, depending upon 1 to 5 terabytes, 2 to 20 terabytes. On the analytics piece, you have SAP HANA. SAP is a very well-recognized company. They got out of depending entirely on Oracle by developing in the whole HANA space. So they've got that database of their own, and now they've got the analytic engine on top of that. That's proven to be very, very successful. And then if you have really high-end requirements around unstructured data, it's Hadoop. Hadoop is the right place. It's open source software. In all honesty, there's not a ton of people that, that can call themselves absolute experts at Hadoop. So you've got to be careful about, your consulting engagement, implementation, deployment, maintenance, and all of that kind of stuff. You've got to look carefully at the market. Dell has pretty robust end-to-end solutions. We've done a ton of Hadoop deployments. In starting off with the U.S., we're right now expanding into Asia Pac and all that. The offering absolutely exists today, stuff like that. So you've got a bunch of stuff that's available, which is really good. You just have to go through the motion of figuring out, how much data do you want mined, how much do you want it, at what level of availability, and that's going to define, where in that spectrum, whether it's fast track, quick start, PWD, HANA, or Hadoop, where in that spectrum do you fall?
Thank you.
Patrick, we have one more question, I think, before wrapping up.
Yeah, hello. My name is Shantanu, and I'm from Valley First. My question is related to big data, especially related to the context of scaling out. Is it possible, for example, to use solutions like Hadoop, as you said, or any other solution where we scale out to provide the necessary capability as well as storage to our nodes, so which can also handle the kind of data analysis requirement which is required by any big data solution?
100% yes. 100% yes. The architecture for Hadoop is absolutely 360 degrees opposite to something like Exadata from Oracle, right? That architecture is built on a completely different foundation, and the foundation for that architecture is purely around scale out. So it's basically nodes, an addition of nodes that allow you to give, which is why, in all honesty, we talk about consolidated storage, and when you think about big data, you think about consolidated storage. But the fact is, Hadoop today is not mature enough for consolidated storage, because the speed of transaction that's required for Hadoop, you can't get it. The moment you introduce a fabric into the equation, you introduce latency. So it's not great for something like that. So when you look at the PowerHC servers that we have, and you look at all the internal drives, that is what Hadoop is phenomenal at. And that is, by essence, a pure scale-out structure, and not a, hey, I will make you buy 500 disks, irrespective of whether you need 10, 50, or 300.
Very well. Thank you very much.
Oh, excellent, guys. Excuse me? Oh, one more question.
Okay, fine. Last one.
Okay, last question.
Last.
My name is Ajit Dikshit, and I work for Metropolis Healthcare Limited. My question to the panel is about the data lifecycle management. One of the challenges we face in healthcare industry is that to maintain the life cycle of each document or each data. Certain document we have to keep for 30 years, certain documents for 15 years. There are some legal requirements, and there are, these all data is related to the patients or some cases. One of the challenge we face internally is how we basically maintain storage of data, but also how we basically maintain these life cycles. So can panel suggest any solution on this?
Can I answer? Sorry.
Yeah, please.
There's a bunch of solutions, in all honesty. Look, here's the thing. Let me put it this way. And it's one of the things I've learned talking to customers across the globe. If you choose to keep all of your storage on production level, my answer is you'll never get a solution. You will never get a solution that you can call satisfactory in terms of meta tagging every file that lives. Structured, unstructured, doesn't matter. If you keep everything on production. Because production class storage is not built. Production class storage is built for performance and availability and things like that. The moment you start getting into archive and object-based storage, that's when you get automated software that allows you to tag absolutely every last file that exists and put an SLA against it. You can actually say, I want this file to exist for this amount of time or this date, after which I can delete it. You can do it at the file level if you've got the enough IT resources to go in and actually meta tag every file. You can do it at a policy level, where if a file has a certain extension or attributes, you can assign those attributes and assign rules and regulations and policies against those. So there's a lot of ways to do it. Look at technologies like object-based storage. Look at the DX6000, for example, that Dell has. You will get all of that in a highly automated fashion. But again, the first step is you've got to take all of that storage out of production and start tiering it. Because unless you get to that point, you're not going to be able to do some of the things you talked about. Sense?
Excellent. So we've come to the end of our program here. I want to first thank the audience for being patient and asking some really awesome questions. And I also want to thank our panelists for doing such an awesome job at opening your enterprise up to us and the entire audience. And Dell folks really appreciate the global and insights through India with all the customers that you talk to. So thank you very much.
Thank you.